Hey there, I'm Sara Porritt, and you are tuning in to the Hear Us Roar podcast. Join me for inspired conversations with Asian women, chatting about how ideas and passions can ignite truly transformative journeys. On today's episode, you'll learn about how Julie Young went from being a full-time attorney to creating DreamMaker 3D, which provides resources, connections, and inspiration for creatives of all types, as well as how you can get in on the action. Building anything from the ground up is not easy, especially in the beginning, so it's essential to bring all of yourself into the experience and to go for it wholeheartedly.
It's really just about embracing the different parts of you, right? Like there's the part of me that has those fears and doubts and times where you're just sort of like, oh, I just want to, And then there's the bad bitch part of me. And it's like they can both coexist. It's not just one or the other.
Having been adopted from Korea at the age of 3, Julie's been on quite the journey of self-discovery. While identity has been a core thread in her personal narrative, her path was far from a straight line. Let's kick things off by talking to Julie about growing up in the suburbs of Rochester, New York.
So my father is Italian-American and my mother is Irish-American. My mom, growing up, did adoptions herself. She was a caseworker for an adoption agency.
Okay.
So it's always been a part of our life. And from the time I was young, I used to talk on panels about adoption. I was like the poster child for adoption since I was little. So it's always been a part of my life. I grew up in a town called Fairport. And, my high school class had probably almost 600 people. So it was a pretty good size, but really little to no diversity at all. I did not have another Asian friend growing up. I remember like 1 or 2 black kids in my class. So I did not really understand my identity growing up at all. I wanted to be white. I wanted to have blonde hair and blue eyes. I wanted to be like everybody around me. I wanted to be like my family. I did not like thinking that I was Asian at all.
And what didn't you like about it?
Well, what's so interesting is that as a child growing up in that type of circumstance, I didn't feel Asian, whatever that means, right? So I'm coming home to spaghetti and meatballs or like
right.
And loving it, and going to a church and a school and being on a swim team with all people who were not Asian. So I didn't know what it meant to be Asian. And so I didn't, even though I would always say I felt like I was in the wrong packaging, which, now as an adult, I look back at that and like, how sad. But that's what it was. I felt like I was in the wrong packaging. It was like, yes, obviously from the outside, I am Asian, but I didn't feel it at all. And it took me a long time to embrace it.
Did you ever have any conversations with your parents about that? Were they aware of how you felt?
No, not really. And, I always say this, and it's true. I don't, my parents did the best they could. And at the time, the pop psychology at the time was just assimilate. So they were actually told, give them American names and just assimilate them as much as you can. Nowadays, we know better. And so white parents who adopt children of color are told, and they should also know, just because, that they should embrace their child's culture, help their children learn that, help their children feel good about themselves and the skin that they're in. But that wasn't the psychology when I was growing up. So my parents did the best they could.
Yeah. And actually, you reminded me of something because when I moved to the States, my parents also felt the same way. So it wasn't just white parents. And they called me Sara because their Jewish friends said Sarah's a nice Jewish name.
Yep. There you go.
But funny enough, when I got to kind of choose how to craft my own identity as a music artist, I decided to go back to my birth name, Bayou, because that's what made me unique. I think that was my point of realization that I really wanted to embrace my culture.
Yeah.
So was there a point actually when you realized, okay, I want to dig a little deeper into this, I want to embrace this, and how did you approach that desire?
Yeah. So interestingly, the cause of me wanting to embrace more of my Asianness was my then boyfriend, now husband, who's black. And he, is so proud of who he is and knows his history and knows global history and knows African history. And so he thought it was really important that I get to know my Asian
That's really
history. And so he was sort of the beginning of it, really just through example, and that, from then it's just kind of been like a catapult into loving my Asianness and being Korean American.
And you also were able to find your birth parents, which is quite incredible. Did that happen after meeting your, at that time, boyfriend, now husband?
No, I found them before starting to date my husband, but I didn't go meet them until after my husband and I were married. So I'm the youngest of 4 in my Korean family, and I have a brother and then 2 older sisters. And the oldest sister was kind of like my mom. She was 11 when I left, and so she had taken care of me for the first 3 years of my life, which I didn't know at that time. But so when she came to pick me up at this hotel where we were meeting, she was like slapping my face, like how Korean moms do. Like, it was like, are you real?
You're a baby.
Are you real?
Yeah.
Like, and just couldn't, just kept slapping my face, and was really intense for her. And then she brought us to my brother's apartment where my mom and everybody was. And yeah, it was pretty emotional.
Yeah, and you still have a relationship.
I do.
With that family.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, you're really lucky to have
I am. I really am, because, for many adoptees, even if they find their families, they don't necessarily have a relationship afterwards. So, yeah.
And how has sort of that entire story and the way that it's unfolded played into your personal identity and who you are today and the things that you kind of value and seek out?
I mean, being an adoptee has always been the biggest part of my identity, whether I understood it or not. And it still is. I think it drives everything I do. It informs the way that I interact with the world. So it's really like the foundation of my identity.
And while suburbia was the set of Julie's childhood, with a head full of dreams and fire in her belly, Julie left the safety net of home and ventured into the Big Apple to further her education. Where did you go to college?
I went to Fordham.
Okay.
I came to New York and went to Fordham. I knew I wanted to be in a big city, thought I wanted to be in New York, so.
Any particular reason why New York?
I wanted to be in a big city. But interestingly, though, I don't think I could have consciously said it at the time, but I think somewhere inside of me, I did seek more diversity and more, something different than the homogenous suburb that I lived in. And even though I couldn't articulate it then, I really believe that was like what my spirit wanted and needed.
Do you remember that moment when you came into the city? What intrigued you about it?
This is where I found myself. This is where I learned to love myself, and it's just really like the only place I'm comfortable. And anytime, New York is a hard city to live in, and anytime, especially once you have a family, but anytime I leave, I always want to come back. So it's definitely my home.
And what was your process in arriving to loving yourself? Because I feel like that can be really, really tough when it comes with age and experience.
Honestly, it's still a struggle a lot of times. It really is a lot of times still a struggle. The part that's not a struggle is the loving my Asian-ness. But the part that is still a struggle, which is huge because, for the longest time I hated it. But the struggle of loving myself completely continues. And it's sort of like a day-to-day type of thing. But it's hard. It's definitely hard.
Yeah, I feel like that's an ongoing battle that most of us are probably going to fight all the way till the end.
It's very hard, yeah.
Did you know you wanted to be a lawyer all from the beginning, or?
When I was growing up, I wanted to be an actor.
Oh, well, it's never too late.
But then, that kind of was somewhat short-lived. Although I was always a very creative person. I always liked to write. I loved to dance. I, loved fashion magazines, and all this stuff. But that was never really super encouraged. And also I had no idea how you would go about doing that type of thing. So at some point I majored in psychology in college, and I knew, I thought I wanted to be a psychologist. And then I decided I wanted to be a lawyer.
How did you make that leap?
Because not knowing at all what it meant to be a lawyer, because there were no lawyers in my family at the time, actually still, other than myself, I thought I wanted to save the world. So I thought that that was a way to do it, and that with a psychology degree undergrad, I would be able to understand my clients better and that type of thing. I don't know. This was my thinking.
You were such an adult even at that age.
Yeah.
Oh, man. I was definitely running around just making music and going to parties.
No, I was definitely partying too. But
And how long were you an attorney for? Well, I mean, you're still an attorney now.
I'm a recovering attorney, but I am still an attorney.
And now you've just basically added to the roster of things that you do, right? So Julie is the founder of DreamMaker 3D. The Thai Film Festival, I believe, is a part of that organization. You also founded the Phenomenal Girls Club. And then we talked a little bit about Korean American Story when you and I chatted. Would love to kind of hear how you got into all of that. What made you make the leap?
So Korean American Story is definitely the first, I think, part of all of this. And I'm super grateful to the organization, to Eataly, the founder and executive director. At the time, a mutual friend of ours connected us because she knew that I like to write. And she said, my friend started this thing called Korean American Story. Maybe you can write for them. And also at the time, my kids were turning 3, which is the age I was when I was given up. So I had a lot of emotions about that. And so I wrote a piece about that. And I sent it to him, and he loved it. And so much so that I thought I was just sending him like a draft. Writers are never done writing, really, but especially like the first draft, And so he just published it.
Oh, wow.
I was like, that was not ready to be published, But after that, we talked about me writing some more. And from that, I started writing a column called Heart and Soul, which was just sort of a personal reflection on, being adopted and just my own experiences and stuff. And then I joined the board and really helped the organization expand its vision and to grow and to sort of work into this it's still doing it, but becoming a sustainable organization that can make, as much impact as possible. And so I was on that board for 9.5 years, and I was board chair for 4.5. And, through Korean American Story, I started the web series Not Your Average, where I interview creative and entrepreneurial Korean Americans.
And you've interviewed some biggies.
Biggies before they were biggies. I've been very fortunate, to know some great people, and I interviewed Dumbfounded and Aquafina and Year of the Ox and
Amory.
I hate naming people because I know I always forget, but I've been fortunate enough to really interview some great people. Korean American Story, helped me really sort of further ground myself in the community. I always knew that I wanted to start my own nonprofit. I just never knew what that was going to be necessarily. And I was still lawyering, but I was helping create young creatives kind of on my own personally. Like Jay Key, I was helping him with some off-the-record stuff with a lot of his creative projects.
Mentorship or actually pitching in and doing some
actually
of the legwork?
Pitching in.
Okay, wow.
I would say both, but actually pitching in and, connecting them with people and doing off-the-record legal work and, stuff like that. And from that, I was like, hey, maybe this could be my thing. It's like, if I'm not being the creative necessarily, I want to support these creatives. And so that's how DreamMaker was born. It's basically, I think of it as what I would have loved to have when I was younger. And, I kind of feel like if I had had something like that, maybe I wouldn't have ever taken this right turn into law school and just continued on with all the creative things that I was interested in.
Yeah, I feel like you and I are kindred spirits in that way, right? We're creating platforms for the younger versions of ourselves, because how nice would it have been?
Oh, my God. It would have, yeah.
And when you were still lawyering and you started to get into Korean American Story and thinking about your nonprofit, was there any part of you that had any ounce of fear or apprehension, knowing that you had to step away from something that was very lucrative, I'm sure?
Yeah. I mean, there's always fear, right? I feel like there's just always fear. But you know what? I think one of the biggest fears, for me at least, and I think some other people that I know, is fear of our own greatness. And so a lot of times we will use these other fears as excuses to not do things when really the real reason is because we're afraid of our own greatness.
And how do you push past that?
I mean, it's still a struggle. It's definitely still a struggle. I think it's really important to, first of all, you have to do things to get your emotions out. I think. And as anybody knows, I'm totally obsessed with shadow boxing.
I was going to say, now it all makes sense once again.
And then, you know, that's a group exercise class based on boxing, and it really is therapeutic. I mean, like, punching a punching bag 5 times a week is super therapeutic. But then also I'm actually in therapy. And, you know, I do a lot of other things that help me at least try to stay balanced. I write in a journal. I try to meditate as much as I can, stuff like that.
So let's unpack DreamMaker 3D a little bit. When you came up with this idea that I want to help young creatives, how did you even get started conceptualizing, like, how do I start building this organization and infrastructure and framework and get people to be excited about it and help me?
So there wasn't a lot of conceptualizing. It was more of just, like, doing it. You know,
I love that.
I mean, really, I probably should have planned it out a little bit more, but I really, because like I said, I was already helping people, that from that is where the mission came out. And the mission is to provide resources, connections, and inspiration for creatives and to nurture future leaders. So I was already sort of helping people individually. And then once I created the mission, then I was like, well, how can I start creating community that will provide this support? So initially, the first thing I did with DreamMaker was I had this speaker series. It was once a month. And we did it for a good solid year. And it was, you know, it varied from author readings to panel discussions. One of the biggest ones we had was the image of the Asian American man. And, I mean, that room was packed.
And that's something that's not very often discussed. I'm glad you had that conversation.
And so many people afterwards were like, can you please continue this conversation? You know, that's a big one. But so that was great, and I loved it, but it was also just me doing it. And I had started working on my film festival, Tide Film Festival, and so I kind of had to put that on hold for a little while. I really want to revive it, so if anyone out there wants to come and help me to revive that, that would be amazing.
Hello.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm raising my hand.
Cool. Perfect. You know, so honestly, there was really no conceptualizing of it. It was just like, okay, what are things that I feel could help create community and connection? And, you know, the film festival, it is kind of its own thing because I just always had the dream to do that. And I think that, you know, representation in the media, lack of representation in the media affects society in such a major way that I think that film, you know, has a huge impact on us. And so representation in film is huge.
I'm with Julie on this one. It's so important for us and for our next generation to be able to see and to relate to the characters we all see on screen. With blockbuster films being a big driver of cultural conversations, it's interesting to reflect on what it means if someone who looks like me has never been cast for the part of the heroine, the romantic lead, or even the villainess for that matter. Representation and the ability to curate that level of influence is extremely impactful. But it's also not without its difficulties. In running DreamMaker 3D, did you run into any challenges or stumbling blocks that you had to solve for, and how did you troubleshoot that? Yeah,
I mean, I'm still building it, so it's still all a challenge, honestly. Like, I still lawyer during the day sometimes because I'm not making money from it, and I want it to be this sustainable organization that can actually employ people, including myself. And so figuring out a way to get it funded, you know, so that we can continually put this programming out year round is a challenge. That's the biggest challenge.
So how are you trying to troubleshoot for that? Because that's tough for a nonprofit.
It is really tough. And I will say, you know, you kind of have to do it program by program. So Tide is sort of the biggest success so far because I think it's easier for people to embrace that vision. So we've been super fortunate. You know, we have sponsors like Warner Media and HBO, and this year the Asian Women's Giving Circle gave us a nice grant. And I think that's just going to continue to grow, especially if people come to the actual festival, because there's, I mean, I say somewhat humbly, like we've created something really special with Tide. So, you know, when it's something like that where people can easily embrace it, then I think that will just continue to grow, and hopefully the sponsorships will continue coming. So I think, you know, it's really a matter of getting in front of the right people and being able to convey your passion and show that you know what you're doing. and have a plan so that people who are going to give you money are comfortable doing it.
And you make it easy for them to contribute.
Right.
Yeah. So how the heck do you balance it all? Because you're a mom.
Yep.
You're a lawyer.
Yeah.
And you run like 80 billion nonprofits.
And I work out 6 days a week. But yeah.
And we're going to work out together.
Yes.
We're going to go to 305 and twerk it out.
I can't wait. Oh my God. Seriously, I can't wait.
So how the heck do you balance it?
So honestly, the most important thing is to take care of myself first.
Mm-hmm.
And, it was a little bit of a forced transition for my family because for so long, as a mom, everything else comes before you. And, that's the way I always was with my husband and with my kids. And at a certain point, I was just like, okay, you know what? I got to take care of myself first. And it's now going to become so important that my workout class is like an important meeting. It's on my schedule and I can't miss it.
She's not kidding. If
kidding.
you follow Julie on Instagram, she's literally posting when she's going to shadow box.
If you go in my calendar right now, like the classes are literally on my
Good for
my
you.
schedule.
Good for you.
Because if you don't treat it that way, you won't get there.
Never do it. You'll never do it.
And if you don't treat it that way, other people won't get that it's that important to you. And then, so like if my kids have something to do or if my husband has something to do and it's during shadow box, they just have to figure out how to get there. And so now they get that, right? Now they get it. But it was an adjustment. But you have to, especially as women, as moms, as, you have to do that or else people will just always be wanting to take something from you. Like they always need something from us because we're caretakers, right? But if you don't take care of yourself first, then you can't be a good caretaker.
Yeah.
So I put myself first.
That's really, really important. You can't pour from an empty cup. And as like a type A individual too, I think it takes a real commitment to set aside time for yourself and not be like, well, I could just keep working, but prioritizing.
Yeah, it's so important. Like I cannot stress. And whenever, people say to me that they don't have time, it just makes me like,
you make the time.
You make the time because you are that important. Like you would never miss your kid's doctor's appointment.
Right.
You would. That's how important it is.
Right. And if you burn out, then what is there left, right?
Totally.
So Julie, if you could travel back in time and speak to a younger version of yourself, so whether that's 3-year-old Julie, 20-year-old Julie, fresh in college, what's one or two pieces of really thoughtful advice that you would give yourself?
Take care of yourself first. Be kind to yourself. Even if you are afraid, to still do it. Because I would never say don't be afraid. I think it's so human to be afraid. I think we're all afraid of something. So to say like don't be afraid is just not realistic. So I would say even if you're afraid, kind of coexist with the fear and just do it anyway.
And what do you tell yourself in your head when you are in a moment of fear?
So there is like a fun current thing that I say, which is, what would Sophia Chang do in this situation? For real. Shout out, Sophia. You are my role model. And basically what that means is, to me, the answer is always, Sophia is so confident and so badass and just is so authentic to who she is that she would just do it. But, it's funny because I've been thinking about that question this week. And because this whole week has kind of been a little bit of a struggle. So I kind of felt like I was going through that this week. And I was like, what am I telling myself to make myself, feel better and whatever? And my conclusion really was that there is not one thing I can say to myself that will get me through that time of struggle. But I think it's more about embrace that I am having this struggle and coexist with it. And continue to take care of yourself so that you can coexist with it. But just know that it might not go away for a little while, but I've still got to do what I've got to do.
So what's next for you and for the organizations that you are a huge part of?
I'm really trying to work on making DreamMaker a sustainable organization that can really bring along as many people as possible too. I have a team of, I think, about 12 people who work on Tide with me who basically don't get paid. And we, especially at this time of the year, are all working full-time on Tide in addition to our day jobs. So, that's not going to last forever, and I know that. And I also want to be able to pay people. That's really the big thing that I'm working on.
So what can my listeners do to support you, support Tide? If they want to get involved, how do they go about doing that?
Well, they can hit me up on social media, send me a message, or go to tidefilmfestival.org. We actually do need volunteers for the actual weekend of the festival. Okay. I think most of our volunteers liked it last year. Yeah, just email me and let me know how you want to get down.
Awesome. Let's get down with Julie.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Julie. This was so fun.
Thank you. Yeah,
I really
thanks for having me.
Appreciate your time.
Thank you.
And thank you for tuning in to the Hear Us Roar podcast. If you connected with Julie's journey, please comment and be sure to hit that subscribe button. Also, pop over to www.hurpodcast.com so that you can stay up to date on all the latest episodes. It's a great way for us to stay in touch so that I can continue to encourage you to see your passions blossom. I'm your host, Sara Porritt, and until next time.